Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are with another series. This time it's focused on Warhammer the Old World. So for those that aren't aware, Warhammer the Old World is a return to the original lore and world of Warhammer Fantasy Battle before Age of Sigmar, and with it brings essentially a new game for the tabletop, but is a return to the style of Warhammer Fantasy Battle with rank and file. Now, this has been announced as being in creation right now with Games Workshop. There is currently no release date, but it certainly is expected either by the end of 2023 or the first half of 2024. So in reality, not that far away. Now, in terms of what this series is looking at, it's looking at those models that are currently available to buy that could well be expected to be part of the army books and army lists that will be used in Warhammer the Old World. Now, we do know there are new models coming, and we'll look at that when we come on to each of the factions. We'll be looking at the factions in alphabetical order, starting with those that are currently in the narrative, and then looking at those that are outside of the narrative, though we do know there are at least rules coming for every faction when the game is first released. Now, why am I doing this? Well, for people like me who are old Warhammer Fantasy Battle players that probably still have existing armies, maybe gathering dust somewhere, who haven't been keeping up to date with what's available on the web store, it's a look at what you could still buy to flesh out the armies that you already own. If you're new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, then it's a look at, if you were going to start an army, what an army might look like, what the models might look like, and give you a chance to maybe dip in early. If you're like me, I'm a very slow painter, so this gives me a chance to buy models in advance of the game being released and have them painted and ready to play when the game does fully release. And as well, not many people are sat there with, £300, £400, £500. We don't know how big the armies are going to be to drop on an army on day one. So this does allow you to then spread the costs over buying the units over many, many months. And sort of you can buy a unit, paint it up, and next month buy a unit, and you're not having to find the money all in one go. Now, I should say everything that is in this series are personal opinions only. I have no inside knowledge. I have no relationship with Games Workshop in that way, other than being a fan of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the lore of that game, and everything in the series is correct at the time of recording only, and I have based a lot of what I'm going to talk about on the last remaining army book that was published for the factions. Many of those will be 8th edition, but there are a few like Chaos Dwarfs and Bretonnia that didn't have 8th edition army books. Now, before we get into it, other miniatures are available. You can find, obviously, the old classic miniatures that are no longer available to buy from Games Workshop on eBay, for example. You've got other manufacturers that you can use as counts as, such as DS Vault with their sort of Crusaders and Templars and so on, Kings of War. There's also those 3D printer opportunities out there, whether you own a 3D printer and you're looking for the files, or whether you're looking for someone to do it for you. That's an option, but always remember that non-official Games Workshop models are not usually allowed to be used in their stores, at gaming tables, or in the tournaments. Also, when you're looking at the Games Workshop models on their website, check the bases. Some of these will have round bases, some of them will have square. Now, we know that they're going to be square bases, but we also know there's going to be some base size changes, so please keep that in mind when you're buying the models. And again, if a lot of times the bases you don't really care if you're just playing at home or playing in a local club, but if you are playing in tournament, you will need obviously the correct base sizes. But if you're not too fussed about making sure they're fully correct, then you've obviously, consider the fact that when you're playing a rank and file game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle was, and like the old world will be, movement trays will be a really important part. So you can mitigate a lot of the base issues with movement trays. Also, check the material. Some people really don't like fine cast, so there's still quite a lot of the old models that are dotted around that may well be fine cast, so check that out versus plastic. And if you are looking at stuff off eBay or whatever, and it's forge wheeled, that of course will be resin, so for example the Chaos Dwarfs. And overall, given what we know about Warhammer the Old World, the timeline it's going to be set in, I would avoid buying named characters unless there's a nostalgia thing. There will surely be rules, even if Games Workshop doesn't do it. The fan base will provide rules for some of those characters that you might have played in the past. You can consider the timeline and maybe take a gamble on, if you look at some of the longer lived characters, whether they be demons or whatever, even elves, for example. Maybe those characters will make an appearance. But with a new game, with a new timeline, I can certainly expect that we might see a few new named characters put in. Though, of course, as always, you can use these named characters as accounts as. So if you had Karl Franz, the Emperor of the Empire, for example, on his Griffin, there's no reason you couldn't use him as a general on Griffin if that option was available. So that is essentially the intro of why we're doing it and some of the considerations that you need to consider while we go through each of these videos. But without further ado, let's go and look at the next faction. So, looking at our next faction here is the Dwarven Mountain Holds. Now, there are still some Dwarven units available on Games Workshop's web store. So let's take a look. And as all the other videos, this is again based upon the latest version of the army list and army book that was available for the faction. So as I state for pretty much all the other factions, I would not go down the route of purchasing any of the special named lords or heroes, and that is because of the change in timeline, and we don't know who's in and who's out unless it is for nostalgia, for example, or in case you want to use it as accounts as. So you can see the special lords that were available though were Thorgrim Gudgebearer, Thorek Ironbrow, Ungrim Ironfist, and Belagar Ironhammer. There were models for some of these available, so if you do want to pick up that model, you will need to check that out on somewhere like eBay, for example, or on various different forums. But in terms of what is available, a generic dwarf lord known as a Warden King is available for £16 on Games Workshop's website, and there is also a Rune Lord who is available also for £16. The Demon Slayer not currently available. I think you're pretty safe with a Dwarf Lord and a Rune Lord. That there's going to need to be some kind of leader of the faction, generic leader, and Rune Lords are also key part of any Dwarf army as well. So I think they're pretty safe picking both of those up, and they're not particularly expensive. If we take a look at the heroes, special heroes with Joseph Bugsman and Grim Burluxon, again, not currently available and not recommended to pick up. In terms of heroes, there was a Thane, a Runesmith, a Master Engineer, and a Dragon Slayer. Again, none of these heroes are available on Games Workshop's website, so you will have to look at alternate areas for those. In terms of core units, not a huge amount available for dwarves. As with all the factions that are on the inside in terms of narrative, expect the dwarves to get new units like the Empire, like the Bretonnians, and so on. So keep that in mind. Though I think it would be difficult on the ones that are still available. I don't think they're going to be too far away from any new aesthetic that might come in. But the Dwarf Warriors, Quarrelers, and Thunderers, Quarrelers with crossbows, Thunderers with handguns, not available. However, you can pick up the Longbeards, and I do quite like the Longbeard units. They are really quite nicely done. You can get 10 of those for £32.50, so not a bad purchase there. In terms of special units, you're very much more on to some of the ones I really do quite like. The Hammerers, as you can see in the picture there, and Iron Breakers. You know, Longbeards, Hammerers, Iron Breakers are absolutely classic parts of a Dwarven faction, and could absolutely see them being in any released army list. Miners, Slayers, the Cannon, the Bolt Thrower, and Grudge Thrower, which are the artillery pieces, currently not available. However, the Gyrocopter is at £32.50, and again, I think, you know, I can't believe there won't be a Gyrocopter in the army list. So all of the ones that are available, definitely worth picking up. Just keep in mind that, you know, 10 for £32.50. How many you're going to pick up in advance. We don't know how big units are going to be. We don't know the sort of points costs. So I certainly wouldn't be diving in, picking up, you know, 60 or 50 or 60 of each of these, units. So I, you know, keep in mind, maybe you just buy, you know, one or two. I can't imagine you'll want to go for more than sort of 20 Hammerers before you know what points are like, before you know, how big units are going to be. So keep that in mind. In terms of the final ones then, which are the rare units, there was an organ gun, a flame cannon, and Rangers, which are also another crossbow unit. They're not currently available. However, Iron Drakes are, and you can see them there on the right hand side. You get 10 of those for £32.50. And again, quite a nice aesthetic, and I would probably match with anything that does come in the future. And then the Gyro Bomber, again, I can't believe that wouldn't be included. And like with many of the other factions, you know, if these are still for sale on Games Workshop's website at the time of the Old World release, I can't imagine Games Workshop wouldn't have included them in the army list when it is first released. But say, do keep in mind that there will be new units for the factions, though there's not going to be a ton of new units for every faction that's in on the day of release. That brings us to the end of the Dwarven Mountain Holds. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more of these videos or more of the other types of videos on the channel, then please hit that subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do, and it means a huge amount for me. So thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.